Hello, I'm Rupert Soskin.
And I'm Michael Bott.
And this is the Standing with Stones Megalithic Podcast.
This podcast is only made possible by monthly donations from our listeners who have supported us through patreon.com. You can become one of our patrons for as little as $1 a month by visiting patreon.com/standingwithstones.
In this, which is only the second of our regular monthly shows, as well as our regular features, hold on to your hats, we'll be discussing one of the more contentious speculations from the film we made 10 years ago, the possibility of henges as arenas for Bloodsports.
And a bit more soberly perhaps, we're going to be talking about the revelations that have been made over the last 12 years at the Ness of Brodgar on Orkney, in one of the most important archaeological excavations in the world. So welcome to episode 2 of the Standing with Stones Megalithic Podcast. Seems like no time at all since we were all being excited about doing episode 1, yet here we are, episode 2. Thank you all, our listeners, our followers on Facebook and Twitter for your engagement and feedback, and a special thank you, of course, to the wonderful people who have become our patrons and are helping us towards producing more content and one day maybe making another film.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to say here that one of the things that's really coming out of all this, because, you know, Mike and I have been certainly publicly away from Stones for some time, and it's amazing when we get stuck into doing the podcasts, we're researching and it's wonderful the amount of stuff that's coming out that really does give us ammunition for the next film when that does come about. You know, your help really on that score is. It
really feels like there's a story to tell now that's developing in the background, doesn't it? Yeah,
it really does. Yes, it's great.
But in the meantime, we will be producing more varied material for the podcast and the in-between bits and stuff exclusively for our supporters as we go along. One thing I recorded was that my piece about Is Durrington Walls a Farm a few days ago. So that's an example of an extra. But we intend to do more things like more films, you know, the odd pop-up on Facebook. And talking of which, we'd like to add a new thing in.
Yes, we really would. It's something that we want to do. Now, we have the podcast. As you know, the podcast comes out at the beginning of every month. And what we're going to do is in the middle of the month, it's going to be the second Wednesday of every month, we're going to do a Facebook Live broadcast where all of you people can come on to the live show, and you can actually join in. You know, send us questions or come on and have some dialogue.
We could call it a Q&A, really.
We could call it a Q&A
or a forum, maybe.
A forum? A forum is good. We could, and all manner of other things. Yes. So, you know, your involvement on that is, do get stuck in and, you know, come and join the fun.
Excellent. Yeah, so we'll be announcing that in detail on Facebook soon. But basically, I think as Rupert said, we intend to broadcast every second Wednesday of the month, probably about 8 o'clock UK time, and we'll see what happens. The show will be open to all while it's live, but we will archive the recordings of the shows and make those available exclusively to our Ballymenoch level and above patrons on Patreon. And if you want to find out about becoming one of our patrons, or indeed what the heck Ballymenoch level means, the address to go to is patreon.com/standingwithstones, as I said in the introduction. So with that, let's go over to the news desk, where, surprise, surprise, we find Rupert Soskin.
Yes, here I am at the news desk. Something I will say right up the top. You might remember last month that one of our news items was the discovery of a piece of jawbone in northern Israel, which pushed back our out of Africa timeline by about 50,000 years. Well, we're finding more and more that archaeologists keep discovering things which push human history further and further back into the past. So we've decided to introduce a new regular section called, not surprisingly, Pushing Back the Boundaries. And we're going to be looking specifically at discoveries that force us to change the way we think about our ancestors and the way they lived. So there you are. With that in mind, the first Pushing Back the Boundaries item is it's actually old news and new news at the same time. And this is the Shigear idol.
Shigear, how is that old news and new news at the same time? You speak with forked tongue.
I speak in riddles. It's old news and new news because the Shigear idol was actually discovered in 1894. So it's not remotely new news from that point of view. It's called the Shigear idol because it was actually dug up in the Shigear peat bog, which is in the Middle Urals in Russia. And it was actually dug up by gold miners. And it's absolutely huge. It is it's the figure of a man, a very tall man. Breathtakingly, it stood, when it was found, it stood 5 meters tall, 17 feet. I mean, it's colossal, this thing. It's got 6 faces carved onto it. Admittedly, some of them are not so easy to see. It's it's quite heavily engraved, with geometric patterns and stuff. Mm-hmm. But this huge figure of a man. And
but if it was discovered in the 19th century, how come it's news now?
Well, the reason it's news now is that it was only in the 1990s. So this is still not new news. It was only in the 1990s, with just the way technology romps forward, that carbon dating became a thing. So they carbon dated a couple of pieces because it was broken, had to be put back together again. So they carbon dated a couple of pieces and dated it to a staggering, for the time, 9,900 years old. And again, carbon dating has become more and more refined and accurate over the last 30 whatever years. So they decided to test it again. This is just last year. And the new tests have put it at 11,500 years old, which is absolutely staggering. Now, the exciting thing about this is that, when you think of, we talk about, most of the stuff that we talk about is megalithic. And so we're, we see so much stuff that we understand a little better from the Neolithic and going into the Bronze Age. But this is almost twice as far back. It's staggering that the only thing we know of that's more or less contemporary with this is the early phases of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And we can't correlate this, the two, because we're talking about how many thousand miles further northeast is this than Göbekli Tepe up in the Urals.
You're asking me?
But it's a long way. But the thing is that partly it's something else we've found that is that old. And also that here's something in wood. We never find wooden artifacts going back that long because they've all rotted away. And it's the wonders of peat bogs. They'll just preserve stuff. So we're going to put links, obviously, as usual, we'll put links to any of these things on the website, so you can check out and follow up on any of this research if it piques your interest. But yes, I just thought that was a staggering thing to put in there.
Can I just say a couple of things about that before we sort of sign up? It's great to follow it and have a link to it, but these are the things that pop into my mind about it. It is what looks like some kind of an idol, a totem or something like that. And although we don't like assuming that things are for ritual or spiritual or ceremonial purposes, but if I was forced to choose, if I was forced to say what I thought, that it seems most likely. And the other interesting thing is about Urals. There, we're about as far as the sea you can get on any landmass on the Earth,
Yeah,
I
that's
think.
true. Yeah.
And we're not far off, or are we still in the Ice Age?
End of the Ice Age, certainly. Yeah.
End of the Ice Age,
Yeah.
yeah. So these were not people of the sea. These were certainly people of the woods.
Yes.
But it just one little interesting thing. It just threw up for me the idea that why from backwards from 2,500 years BC, everything's got a lithic. We've got the Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic.
Yes.
I'm thinking, why?
Because that's when stone use became a thing.
Well, yes, but wait. My point is that we're probably using stone in order to use wood.
Okay, I see what you
Do you see what I mean?
Yes,
Yeah,
I do.
It may be just skewing our minds a little bit about weighting things. Maybe it should be called the Flint Age. That would be more accurate. I don't know. But it's just a thought that popped into my head with reference to this. I didn't want to go on too long, but I thought that was interesting.
Maybe
Anyway.
that's something we can explore in a future podcast.
In the meantime, follow the links and have a look and see what you think. All right.
So, on to the regular news items. And what are we kicking off with today, Mike?
I do believe that we're kicking off the regular news item with a crystal dagger.
Oh, yes. This is
From
in Spain.
southwestern Spain.
Indeed, it's near Seville, actually, down in the south. This is Valencina de la Concepcion down there.
Well done.
It's one of the Tholos style burials, and so it's they're beehive style burials. Some of them, it sounds small actually. Some of the Spanish beehive style burials, they're massive things, very impressive. But this particular one is quite unique in that they have unearthed a whole load of crystal weapons, and one of the pieces in there was a stunning crystal dagger. It's just nothing like it. I've never seen anything like it before. There were arrowheads and spear tips.
I've got a picture of the dagger in front of me now, the dagger blade, and it is so beautiful. It's perfectly proportioned, perfectly symmetrical. Yes,
Just breathtaking workmanship.
a magnificent piece of work by any work.
And
yeah.
it's just, apart from the fact that it sets your mind going in so many different areas, really. Of who was this character who had a whole load of crystal weaponry buried with him, But one of the other aspects of this burial is that what they found actually in the tomb, there were 25 people in there, and only one man. All the rest of them were women, and analysis has shown that they were poisoned.
Oh, really?
They drank a poison. The assumption is that they drank a poison substance. I'm not quite sure where they get that, but we've seen that in a number of cultures around the world. That whether it's the servants who are buried with somebody, or look at some of the Indian cultures where a woman is killed, to accompany her deceased husband into the afterlife, that sort of thing. Remarkable discovery.
I didn't realise this about the bodies and the poison. I mean, my goodness, you've got not only an archaeological story, you've got the beginnings of a novel, an historical and prehistorical novel, if you want. Yes. But the other thing I was picking up from it as well, you said 25 bodies. Interestingly, there are 25 crystal arrowheads in that burial as well, as long as a few microliths and a rock crystal form as if it was about to be made into something.
Do you know what? I had not registered that at all. 25 arrowheads and 25 people.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to double check on that, and maybe, dear listeners, you better double check on that as well by following the link that we'll leave below. But interestingly enough, for us, of course, this time-wise, in terms of dating, this falls into really what is our area of interest. We're talking end of Neolithic, coming into the Bronze Age, Copper Age.
Yeah,
is it?
3000 BC. It's dated. At least that far back.
But the interesting thing is working, artifacts made of rock crystal anyway. In the first place, they're very, very rare. I believe that rock crystal artifacts have been found in just 33 other sites, and all in that sort of basically southwest area of Spain, in similar kinds of burials, but this is the only one with any large number of artifacts in it. The other ones have got perhaps one or two, and probably only microliths or something like this. This burial with all this going on speaks to wealth and or power.
Yes,
centered around this area, which is very close to, if not part of, Seville now.
It's an interesting part of Spain generally. I think if you look at the burials down there, you can reasonably assume that there was a good deal of power, or certainly importance. The burials are pretty lavish.
The other thing I picked up, that alongside the fact that rock crystal is found in that area, that concentrations of other exotic materials, for example, gold and amber, sort of centre round this particular area, which, food for thought.
Definitely food for thought. And if you, listeners, if you're going to pursue the links to this particular find, that it's also worth bearing in mind the amount of grave goods that, apart from all this crystal wonderment, the grave goods in there, so many beads, for example, and that's no mean feat either. Amber beads. What do you think? Going back then, what were they using to drill holes into amber? It's just so many things that we tend not to think that much about. The craftsmanship and skills involved in this are breathtaking.
Yeah. Have we said enough about that for the moment?
I think we've said enough about that, shall we?
Like we said, if you want to find out more, follow the links on which we'll post below on Patreon, on the website, and on Facebook. So that said, nothing else you want to say there, Rupert?
On that, no, I think I'm done on that. I'm going to toss over to you with. Go on, what have divers found, Michael?
Well, they've found, and this is wonderful, we're moving from the sublime, in terms of materials, moving from the sublime to the slightly mundane. Divers have discovered a 5,000-year-old shoe in a Swiss lake. And the 5,000-year-old shoe, Rupert, is made of...
It's made of bark.
Do you know...
Tree bark.
Yeah, I'm finding that hard to visualise somehow.
Well, I think you need to put this in a context. It's not bark as in, a rigid shoe like a clog. It's actually from the inner section of the bark. It's been made into a fibre. So it's a woven shoe, but it's from tree bark. So it had, I suppose it had a toughness to it that maybe some other cordage plants wouldn't have had. So it's very beautifully woven. But nevertheless, it must have been a very tough piece of footwear. Yeah. It's just lovely that they found it at the bottom of a lake. So often these things are, they're just long gone. It's a bit like the Shigear idol in the peat bog. We lose these things, and so to have something preserved at the bottom of a lake, it's It's really
And
quite
just the one
intoxicating.
item, nothing else besides?
As far as I'm aware, nothing else besides.
Another enigmatic story.
Indeed, an enigmatic story. What's lovely about this, though, is that when you have something, see, we're used to, whether it's when we find a new site, it's exciting, or grave goods, whatever. The thing is that when it's a shoe, that it's personal.
Yeah.
That you're actually touching somebody specific, even though you don't know who they were or whatever. But it's a person as opposed to things. Do you know what I mean?
Well, yes. I mean, it completely changes your perspective, quite unconsciously in a way. It makes them human beings, makes them real.
Yes.
He had a shoe, she had a shoe, I have shoes. It's as simple as that. You can relate. All of a sudden, you can relate. To the problems of tying your laces. And but it was the most powerful thing. Right at the end of the film, at the end of our film, Standing with Stones, when you were holding between your fingers that wonderful hematite, is it? Black hematite button.
It really did blow me away, that little button.
Yeah. Same thing. I've got buttons. He had buttons.
Yeah,
we're the same. We're people.
It's the personal thing that you.
So anyway, so is that all we've got for the news?
Yeah, well, there's
megalithic news
on that. I think we'll leave those links and we can move on to meatier things.
We can move on. That's a bit of a pun, Yes, so literally moving on to meatier things, Bloodsports. When Rupert and I set out to make Standing with Stones, I mean, we didn't have an agenda of ideas that we wanted to impose on the Stones. The only thing we had going, and the clue is in the name of the film, really, we wanted to see if being with the Stones, if the Stones had anything to say to us. Was there anything that we could learn from, having this unique experience that we were going to have? We would be visiting over 100 monuments in a span measured in just months. So having that experience, would it illuminate what we already know? In the end, despite that unique experience of traveling about the place, it really was in the 6 months after that, in the 6 months of post-production, that certain pennies began to drop about what we'd seen. And especially for me, when I was creating the CGI recreations of the large henges of Avebury and Stanton Drew. When we were standing there, standing in the green with these monstrous, enigmatic spaces before us, it was one of the times when I think we most wanted a time machine.
Didn't
to
we,
travel back and really try to decipher what the driver was to use all those man-hours digging such deep ditches, creating such large mounds, such large banks. And I think having the personal experience of watching these places come to life on my computer screen as I was creating these images and animations, that the scale was far more than we were conscious of when we were actually at the places, because, of course, the ditches have filled up and the banks have been worn down over time. And they began to look spectacular. And the more I looked at them, the more they began to look like great arenas, the henges of Avebury and of Stanton Drew.
Yes, I think it became increasingly apparent, didn't it, that it only really made sense to us when we started to think of them in terms of being arenas. It's long been said that henges couldn't have been defensive because if you've got a plateau inside a raised bank, then any invading force, however tiny that force may be, anybody on the inside would have just been sitting ducks in the middle of the circle. Banks. Well, it does. It's just it makes sense to have banks set up there as places for spectators.
That's right. And on top of that, there were two other aspects that really combined with what seemed to be obvious in front of our faces, that these were giant arenas. And that is, I'd been reading Mike Pitt's book, Henge World, in which he talks at length about excavations and discoveries at Durrington Walls, not far from Stonehenge, as you know. One particular aspect of it that they had uncovered evidence of pig slaughter and pig consumption alongside cattle and sheep and so on and so forth. But the curious fact was that the method that had been used to slaughter the pigs was not through any kind of normal process that you would imagine, the simple slicing of the throat or the whatever. These hogs had been shot with a bow and arrow within the space of Durrington Walls before being eaten, before being feasted upon. And the third aspect of this was the surprising one from Stanton Drew particularly, and is in evidence at Durrington Walls as well, is these massive wooden posts erected in concentric circles, particularly at Stanton Drew with a size. We're talking about posts that are a metre wide and posted, a metre away from each other? Perhaps a bit more than that. But
it's all very geometric. So they're a metre wide and a metre spaced.
Yeah. And I can't remember exactly how many posts, but it's a mass of wooden posts creating what could only be described, if looked on from the outside, as looking like a forest. There seems to be we'd normally interpret post holes as implying that there was some kind of building there. But if you entered this building, there'd be nothing to do in the building. There's no space to do anything that seems remotely practical inside there. So in my mind, it was a case of what habits would carry over from being a hunter, or indeed, as we still do, celebrate hunting. How would you, as close to the land as you are, how would you still celebrate hunting? And the idea just struck that here we have an artificial forest where you can recreate the hunt.
Indeed, I think it's very interesting when you look at it in relation to the sorts of blood sports that still exist today. So bullfighting, for example, that over however many thousand years, where you ceased to need to hunt in a forest, gradually you were creating clearings and actually farming animals as opposed to going out and hunting them in forest environments. So to have bullfighting as a legacy, if you like, to me that's what remains there. It's just an extension of the same practice, I think.
But the interesting thing was that this wasn't a thought process that had just been taking place in my brain as I was looking at these spectacular arenas coming to life, but you quite independently were coming to the same, if not a similar position.
Yeah, absolutely. It in fact, it was very reassuring for both of us, wasn't it? That it was. I remember where I was when you phoned up, and we both said it's Bloodsports. And yes, it's when you're coming from ever so slightly different angles. Because I was looking at you were looking at the posts.
Yeah.
And I was looking at the banks and ditches, basically, all tied into the same sites, and realising that actually they just bounce off each other. You're left with an artificial forest that spectators can look into
Yeah.
and watch the hunting going on. I think it's worth pointing out one other aspect to this as well, and that's that if you go back to the Neolithic, so we've not long come out of a culture that was based on hunting. And getting into the Bronze Age, we got into farming, including agricultural farming and smaller homesteads, things like that. That in terms of sport, because one of humanity's greatest drivers is competition, and so to shift from a spectator sport or a spectacle that was watching hunting going on, that gradually in the Bronze Age, when it became, we were no longer showing our prowess by hunting, we were showing our prowess by fighting, because in the Bronze Age, when farming kicked off, it was the first time that people had needed to defend their own territory. So it meant that it was now man fighting man as opposed to beast, and that's when arenas started to become more gladiatorial.
Yeah.
So we ended up with the Roman arenas and what have you when we were just looking at blokes killing blokes.
Well, no, in the Colosseum, we're also looking at
in
animals.
the Colosseum, they were insane, weren't they?
Absolutely insane. We're talking about.
I think Nero was amongst the worst, wasn't he, or was it Caligula?
I don't Nero, I think, but we're talking about animals killing animals, animal action. In fact, we're digressing slightly, but the Romans were responsible for a massive depletion of exotic wild animals in the north of Africa.
Yes.
At that time.
Anyway,
that's several millennia on from where we're talking about.
Yeah.
But that's our position. That's our proposition, which we'd love people to weigh in on, of course. And it's not going to be a popular one with everybody, but I think it moves the conversation on a lot, and I think it's moved it on a lot with us because bringing the practicality of animals into the subject, it has made us look in terms of animals generally, and particularly animal husbandry itself, and what impact that might have on what we see in the structures of ancient monuments generally, whether it is another useful lens to be looking at some of the unexplained aspects of our ancient monuments, which is a whole other conversation, but I think we don't really have time to examine that here, and perhaps we'll leave that and change gear and move a few 100 miles north.
So, yes, talking about livestock, it's something that we actually mentioned it briefly in the last podcast, because one of the things that had come out of Durrington Walls, excavations at Durrington in Wiltshire, was they'd discovered that loads of the cattle came from Scotland. And that really ties in very neatly with the excavations and extraordinary work that's been going on over the last years on Orkney. There's a saying on Orkney: if you scratch the surface of Orkney, it bleeds archaeology, and never a truer word.
I know, and having had the privilege of being there ourselves, we can pretty well confirm it. It is astonishing. It was astonishing, wasn't it, Rupert? I think to even then, before the Ness of Brodgar started to be excavated in earnest, which is what this section is about, standing there amongst the stones of Stennis, in the ring of Brodgar, and only, half a mile away, you've got Maze Howe, that most magnificent of burials, and not a few miles away, Skara Brae, and countless other things on the island. Even then, we were aware, and were asking indeed the question: how come such a concentration of magnificence in such a small space on an island cut off from the mainland?
And also worth pointing out, in fact important to point out, that the Ring of Brodgar, up there on a tiny island, the Ring of Brodgar is the third largest stone circle in the whole of Britain.
And isn't Stennis the fifth or sixth or something like that? I mean, it's, it's comparable, isn't it?
Stennis, well, the height of them, in terms of diameter of circle, no. But in terms of the size of the stones, I would say very much yes.
Yeah, and of course you have to bear in mind that these two stone circles are within sight of each other. They're only a few hundred yards apart.
Yeah.
And now, right bang between them, on the Ness of Brodgar, on the isthmus between the two locks, one freshwater, one saltwater, is where the current excavations are taking place.
And just wow, what they have uncovered. See, one of the most significant things that's come out of these excavations on Orkney is that it's turned, from a megalithic point of view, it's turned Britain on its head. The sites that they've been dating on Orkney predate everything across the rest of Britain. It's just it's the most remarkable thing. You're looking at 3,600 BC for this first colonisation, and the main building and the main monument building kicking off around 3,300 BC. That's significantly earlier than any of the major complexes that we know about, Wiltshire, for example.
Yeah. And of course, the other thing to understand is that this is one of those sites, as so many are, where the buildings, when the structure, when the monument was in use for a long period of time, several centuries we're talking about.
I think if we're talking culturally, it's important to bear in mind something happens in our heads. We think of that as extraordinary, and yet look at any church across Britain.
Yeah.
Obviously not modern churches, but we still use sites for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
It's not something that's inherently unusual.
Interesting point you make there. Yes, that deserves further investigation. Probably a bit further investigation or thought at another time. I can sense there are quite a few avenues that could take us down.
Well, certainly. I mean, we will keep talking about, because it is going to happen, and I have started work on it anyway. But we will be doing a timeline at some point to show all sorts of different things that were happening concurrently, and certainly use of sites. I mean, burial sites that were in use for well over 1,000 years, things like that. So yes, so if we look at the excavations of this hub on the
That's a good way of putting it. A hub, yeah. Because I think that's it's an important thing to try and characterise. I'm sure people have seen pictures of the excavations, or indeed recreations of what they may have looked like, the buildings on the Ness of Brodgar. But it's important to sort of characterise them in a way. But if you didn't know, they certainly do not turn out to be domestic buildings. They're very much of a different character to those at Skara Brae, which are demonstrably domestic.
Yes, true to form, the archaeologists have called the main building a temple.
And it could be.
It could be. Although I have to say, from a personal point of view, I know I give everybody the impression that I'm just wantonly anti-temple. I'm not. I'm just wantonly anti the assumption, and certainly this looks nothing like any temple that I've seen anywhere else in the world. It just happens to be the largest of the buildings. The position of the smaller buildings around this larger building, to me it seems much more functional. I don't honestly think that if you were building a temple, I don't think that you would have another couple of buildings at incongruous angles to it. It seems very unceremonious
Yeah,
to
well,
me.
that's something that I'm not sure that the archaeology is extrapolating, and that is, of course, that the building that you're referring to, which is referred to as a temple, is referred to as Structure 10
Yes.
of the 5 main ones that are being excavated. And Structure 10 was only built a century after. You have to sort of pinch yourself a bit, don't you? Was
Yeah.
built a century after the other 4, and was in use
Yes.
long after the other 4 had fallen out of use. So whether
Yes.
at the crossover or the others fall into disrepair or come back into use several times during that period, what the relationship between this one structure and the others was during that time. And I believe Structure 10 overlaps one of the other structures at a corner. How really contemporaneous they were.
Yes, it is very difficult to interpret, that's for sure.
I mean, notwithstanding what we've said, there is something completely unique about this set of buildings, if not in the rest of Northern Europe, but certainly in the UK itself, that sucks our attention away from down south and Wiltshire, up into the north, off the shores, and onto this island, effectively, as we were mentioning before, turning a perspective upside down about where wealth, power, whatever, was at that time.
Yes, it's completely on its head.
And who was influencing who. That's the main thing about the importance of the excavations that are taking place on Orkney at this time.
I think it's worth pointing out that the length of time that all of this was going on. So, as we mentioned earlier, so they first colonized around 3600 BC, and then over hundreds of years got into the main monument building, where everything peaked about 500 years after that initial colonization. Now, if you apply that to any other part of history, it's like us going back to Elizabethan times or Henry VIII. In terms of that gap of time, and then there was a period of decline from 2800 to 2600 BC. There appears to have been a period of decline, and that they're measuring or they're estimating from the number of buildings that seem to have been in use. But then it all kicked off again, and this was 2600 to 2300 BC. It was all busy again, and whatever happened, and we just don't know, but whatever happened, it all came to a very abrupt end. It's as if they handed over their legislative power to the young upstarts down south, or whatever. And what they found is they found the remains of 400 cattle that appear to have been killed or butchered all around the same time. That's a big guess. That the interpretation is that it was the mother of all feasts. Personally, I think there's nothing to show that they couldn't all have been killed over a year or more. It could just have been the centre of meat production for quite a larger area. If we remember that remember that cattle remains, Scottish cattle, have been found in Wiltshire. At Durrington Walls, they found the remains of Scottish cattle. So what's to say that these animals weren't being butchered up there and actually meat being traded all over the country?
What's to say, indeed? I mean, that and many, many questions that we can't possibly fit into the time we have here. We could talk about the discovery of a Scottish stone ball. We could talk about the fact that the inside of Structure 1 and Structure 8 appear to have painted walls. We could talk about the strange, finely worked stone spatulas that are found there that nobody has found an explanation of. So, I mean, what we're doing here, Rupert and I, is something that I'm sure we'll find ourselves doing in these first episodes of Standing with Stones, and that's, catching up. There's lots happened since we completed Standing with Stones, the film, in the last 10 years. And I think we're trying to lay a foundation so that we don't spend a lot of our time catching up with stuff that's already known. So we're dealing with these important things that are going on straight away in these first few episodes. So, as I say, loads more questions to be asked, loads more, I'm sure, to be discovered on the Ness of Brodgar. But the big takeaway being that, what we're hearing is that it turns the perspective, the way we look at Neolithic culture in the British Isles. We need to look from Scotland down. We need to look from Orkney down rather than from Wiltshire up.
Yes, it's wonderful stuff. So the links will be there on the webpage. You can follow all of it. There is a lot to look at.
There is a lot to look at and a lot to enjoy, actually, particularly on the Ness of Brodgar site itself, where there are updates from the digs when they're happening, and a rather gorgeous section where you can explore photographic 3D sort of virtual reality pictures of the excavation itself. Yeah, so enjoy that, follow the links, and with that, I think we'll move on to where should we go? Where should we go, Rupert?
You know where we're going.
I think a bit of lightness, a bit of frothiness is needed, don't you?
Yes, it is. Yes,
wrap
let's
things
lighten
up,
the mood.
Finish it off. Yes, all right. Which can only mean it's time for Stonehead of the Month.
Yes, it is. Stonehead of the Month. And this month, our Stonehead is Mo Keown. Mo Keown, she has just come back from Dartmoor recently. She's going back to Dartmoor. She so fell in love with the place and the huge amount of megalithic sites there are all over the place. And the reason...
Which reminds me, we must go back there too.
We really must go back there too.
Yes,
It is,
sorry, carry on.
It is without doubt my favourite place in the whole of the British Isles from a megalithic point of view. But see, me being a grumpy old person... The reason that I particularly wanted
Never
to
let
make...
it be said.
The reason I particularly wanted to make Mo Stonehead of the Month this month is because Mo came back from this trip and she posted about 100 photographs of sites that she'd visited all over the moor and everything else. And do you know what? Out of 100 shots, not a single selfie was there to be seen.
Whoa.
And,
round of applause.
Absolutely, massive round of applause. And see, I'm one of those grumpy old photographers who, well, it used to be that you'd go away and you'd take photographs and you'd come back and you'd show people photographs of where you'd been. But these days, it's all people going to places and saying, well, here's a photograph of me here, and here's a photograph of me there. And me. And now
I do that.
I don't want to upset. I know you do.
I do.
I don't want to upset people because I know that a lot of you do love your selfies. But good grief, it was a breath of fresh air. Well done, Mo.
Well done, that girl. Look, it's all very well being Stonehead of the Month, but what do you get for being Stonehead of the Month, Rupert?
That's a very good question. And the truth is we haven't made up our minds. Well, you will be getting something.
One day.
Yes, we haven't quite decided what this is going to do, but what this is going to be. But we are going to do a token of our admiration for your stoneheadedness. When we do announce it, then any of you who have been in our list of Stoneheads of the Month, you will be backdated, as it were. You will receive
and
yours.
You will get a token of our deep appreciation.
You will, in due course.
All right. Right. Shall we move on?
Well, let's
We've
move
got
on.
more. Let's do some whimsy, shall we?
So, yes, the regular whimsy section. And, well, what whimsy have we got today, Michael?
We've got a wonderful piece of whimsy, Rupert. Now, tell me, can anyone tell me, what you would find if you dug under Aubrey Hole number 7 at Stonehenge?
I'm not going to steal your thunder. Tell me, Michael, what would you find if you dug into Aubrey Hole number 7?
Well, there are 56 Aubrey holes round the periphery of the central area of Stonehenge, just inside the ditch, just inside the bank, I should say. But if you dug down now, down below Aubrey Hole number 7, which I think is the most easterly, it's either 6 or 7, the most easterly of the holes, you would find 4 Hessian sandbags filled with the bones of 50 individuals from earlier excavations at Stonehenge, complete with a lead plaque explaining how they came to be there. Yeah, the bones in question actually were excavated by William Hawley, who was the first real excavator of Stonehenge. And we're talking nearly 100 years ago now. He did a massive amount of work, virtually alone on the site. And his diaries are something to be read. You know, he noted everything. But in those days weren't quite so good with every piece of bone they dug up. So at the end of his day, they had ended up with quite a few fragments of bone and cremated bone from about 50 individuals. And eventually in 1935, not knowing quite what to do with them, in January 1935, they were buried in a small ceremony in Aubrey Hole number 7. Why Aubrey Hole number 7? We'll probably never know. But there they are. And there's nothing on the surface to tell you that. You can, anybody wandering past, around the rope guidelines, around Stonehenge, will be none the wiser as they wander past that particular little white marker. Yeah.
No, but it is hysterical because you can imagine in however many thousand years in the future that they dig up Stonehenge again and what's any future archaeologist going to make
Well,
of
this
that?
is the non-whimsical point to be made here, about beyond the carbon dating of the remains. There's absolutely no clue as to what the real dating of the burial, or the digging of this particular pit now. It would just completely confound anybody, a future archaeologist. And who's to say that we're not being confounded now in so many ways, by...
Well, I'm confounded, I have to tell you.
So
dear, because there isn't any record, I don't think, is there, of where were the...
Yeah.
So we've got the remains of 50 individuals who were all in Aubrey Hole 7. But where were these 50 individuals' remains... or from whence?
Oh, quite an extensive area within the Stonehenge monument.
Yeah,
and they're not complete individuals. They're bits and pieces from different individuals. Yeah, otherwise I don't think they'd fit in 4 Hessian bags. But
yes, so it's extraordinary. So you could interpret that as some major exhumation and then a reinterment, which is of course not remotely what it is.
Yes, and of course it would have been a grand ceremony, if not some kind of ritual, wouldn't it?
Mm.
You take my point.
Yes, it would. Go on. Stop it.
Anyway, moving on. We have a second piece of whimsy I came across accidentally. I think I came across this through a post on Twitter, and I don't know who to attribute it to, but the artist, Tracy Emin, apparently is married to a standing stone.
She is as mad as a box of squirrels.
Well, I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, she is an artist, after all. She has a serious purpose to most things she does, and doesn't, really, like most artists, are not going to comment upon the meaning of what they do. It's what they do stands on its own 2 feet or otherwise. But the thing is, apparently she's lucky enough. I mean, she has places in London and south of France and New York, and her studio in the south of France, which is on the Côte d'Azur, between Nice and Marseille, I think, just happens to have a very nice menhir in it.
So she married it?
And one sunny day put on a wedding dress and married it. Well, said some words of adoration to it anyway. Yeah.
Oh dear.
So you could just it's there. The information out there on the internet is slightly confusing. Sometimes it gives you the impression that she married the standing stone in Paris. I initially had the impression she'd married a standing stone in Cornwall. Right. So I don't know, but this is the truth of the matter. The standing stone.
Maybe it's the confusion of where they went on honeymoon.
Well, it could well be. It could just be the media.
So do we know when she actually married this standing stone?
A little bird tells me it was 2016. I think wasn't a major song and dance made about it. I think she told people about it at an exhibition in Hong Kong at that time. I don't know.
2016, and okay, well, we have to assume that the marriage is still going well.
Very good.
I wish them all the happiness in the world.
Very good. I think that's enough whimsy for now, don't you?
That's enough.
Yeah. If you want to know more about Tracy Emin and her stone, you know where to go. We will. I'll put a link in, but there's nothing very edifying about it. I just thought it'd be amusing to slot in there.
Well, right. So that just leaves a few things to be said, then, I suppose, doesn't it? Really, I think first of all, a big thank you to all of you for tuning in, downloading and listening to what we have to offer. We do enjoy doing it. And obviously we rely very much on your support. We couldn't do it without you. And so if you want to come along and join us, be subscribers and help us really push this progressively further and further along, then do go and have a look at our Patreon page. It's at patreon.com/standingwithstones. And
we've got lots of perks and rewards available for people that choose to support us. And you can become a patron for as little as $1 a month. That's approximately 73p, I think. Something like that. But there are several other levels, including the Ballymenook level. Anyway, I think one day what I'm going to do is make a little vid to explain all the different levels. So
that's not a bad idea.
Yeah. I'll do that. So what else? A reminder, perhaps, of what we're planning to do mid-month.
It'll be the second Wednesday of each month in the evening, about 8:00. That will be confirmed, but I'd say at the moment it's going to be 8:00 in the evening on the second Wednesday of every month. We shall have a mid-month get-together, so you can come online, join us, ask questions, and listen in. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, great. So watch out for a Facebook event going up soon. And with that, it is time to say goodbye until the next time.
Yes, goodbye and thanks again. See you soon.
Bless you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.